During my teens, Dad often went out to buy some cigarettes at night. I knew he occasionally did some shady stuff, but it was only when he went to buy cigarettes that Mom's face creased in disapproval. She never said a thing, though her revulsion was palpable. The moment he left, she always grabbed a bottle of whiskey and got hammered while watching TV. I was certain that Dad went to a brothel or had a mistress, and I was determined to confront him and tell him what it did to Mom. One night, I decided to follow him. I pretended to go to bed and left Mom to her misery, while I climbed out of my bedroom window using a rope. Since my room directly faced the backyard, I left the rope there without worrying about a thief coming in. The first clue that something wasn't right was when Dad walked in the opposite direction of the shops. Half an hour later, he stopped in front of an industrial complex and scoured the area before unlocking the gate leading to it. He didn't notice me because I wore dark clothes and stayed far enough back to avoid detection. I waited a minute to be safe and went after him. A rumbling metallic noise startled me. I glanced in its general direction. I saw Dad stoop underneath the garage door and close it shut from the inside. There was no way in without being noticed, no windows to peek. Luckily, I spotted a nearby access ladder, which I climbed in the hopes of finding another way in. Instead, there were a bunch of triangular skylights, giving me a full view of the building's interior. Dad was conversing with several people inside that warehouse. They gave him a briefcase full of money. I was initially shocked, believing that my dad was a drug dealer. Except it wasn't drugs, it was much worse. A hidden trap door slid open, and from it, a dozen emancipated children emerged. The men rushed them in the back of a van while Dad opened the garage door to let them out. I couldn't breathe. Everything made sense. Our house looked old on the outside, but was brand new within. There were piles of cash stashed within the walls, luxury bags and watches, and we could always buy anything, cash only. Dad was shutting down the lights. I hurried down and ran back home. I climbed up the rope and spent the night crying in bed. Each time I followed him afterwards, the same thing happened. Unable to let this horror continue, I anonymously tipped the cops. Our house was raided soon after. Dad got life without parole. Mom drank herself dead within months, and I was sent to a foster care. We lost everything. Today, even though my life turned to shit reading the headline, "Major Human Trafficking Ring Dismantled," leaves me without any regrets. My decision was worth every single life that was saved. I was in kindergarten when it happened. I watched from my bedroom window as my dad lugged my mom's limp body into the woods behind our home, dug a shallow grave, and buried her. I remember him phoning 911 and concocting a story about her going missing. I'll never forget how masterfully he handled the police questioning her at our home that day, perfectly reciting his phony recollection of events, crying at the right moments, and angrily demanding that officers bring his wife home. Time passed and Mom's case grew cold, eventually becoming an afterthought. Dad went on with life parenting my sister and I, and things were normal, until it happened again. I staggered out to the back porch one night to witness my dad carrying the lifeless body of my neighbor into the woods. Just as with Mom, he dug a shallow grave and proceeded to bury him. Once again, he dealt with the police with ease when suspicion against him arose. I remember him making eye contact with me as he walked the cops to the door, an unspoken understanding to remain silent about the situation. Life moved forward and things were quiet at the house until it happened again. I stood in the backyard and watched silently as my dad carried my sister's dead body out of the house and towards the woods. All of a sudden he paused, laid my sister on the ground, and turned to look at me. We stood facing each other in complete silence, unsure of what to say or do next. After what seemed like an eternity, a weeping voice broke the stalemate. I can't continue to keep silent about this. I'm sorry, but when the police come, I'm going to tell them the truth." You really think they're going to believe a child did it? Grab the shovel and get digging. This story happened to me a few years ago. It is important to note that I suffer from recurring sleep paralysis, as well as prior and subsequent sleep hallucinations. These rarely happen now, but there were times when they were more frequent. That day, when I woke up, I was changing my position from facing the wall to facing the middle of the room. I thought that I had simply woken up in the middle of the night from a bad dream, so I wanted to go back to sleep without thinking too much about what happened. But the closer I got to falling asleep, the stranger I started to feel. My body started to feel tense instead of lighter as it's supposed to be. Suddenly, I heard my parents' bedroom door opening and started hearing footsteps, very slow but heavy, approaching my door. Once the footsteps were right at my door to my room, there was silence for about 10 to 20 seconds, followed by a knocking. Immediately after the knocking, I started to feel very uneasy, and my heart started to race. I knew something was wrong and not right at all. After the knocking, I heard a voice that sounded like my mom calling out my name and asking me if I was asleep. At that moment, I knew that whatever that thing was, it was not my mom, and I started to slowly panic, my heart pounding even harder. I quickly hid under my blanket, closed my eyes, and pretended to be asleep. Right after that, the door to my room opened, and I could hear the thing walking into my room. Then it just stopped again, followed by silence for another 10 seconds. "Are you asleep?" it asked again in my mom's voice, now standing right in front of my bed. At this point, I was scared beyond anything and thought if that thing didn't kill me, my heart would. I was trying so hard not to make any noise or to hide my fast breathing and heartbeat. Thankfully, whatever that thing was, it left my room the same way it walked in, but it left my door open. I took a peek under my blanket when I heard the footsteps disappear from my room and saw that a red light was shining from the corridor outside my room. So I just stayed there under my blanket for a few more minutes when I suddenly felt like waking up. But it wasn't really like waking up because I was already awake. I don't know how to explain this feeling. It's like your brain turning off the hallucination switch and everything turns to normal. Except when I did wake up, my door was still open. When I woke my mom up in the middle of the night to ask her if she had gone into my room, she responded with an obvious no and was annoyed at me for waking her up.